COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex Soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex Soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex Soap is affordable and available nationwide.
Good evening, Guyana. It is time to enter room 592 where we unleash the truth. It is now 19 hours 31. This evening, joining us at the helm of the program, as usual, Dr. Yog Mahadeo and his esteemed guest this evening, Sian Dujan, attorney at law. And we are awaiting Mr. Freddie Kassoon at exactly 8 p.m. But in the meantime, we shall get the show on the road. Good evening, gentlemen. Dr. Yo, can you hear us? Dr. Yo, can you hear us?
I can hear you very faintly.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. It is time to enter room 592 where we unleash the truth. This evening at the helm of the program, Mr. Dr. Uncle Yog Mahadeo, as you know him, the Silver Fox, as he is known to Kaieteur Radio, and his esteemed guest this evening, Sian Dujan, attorney at law. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening to you, Kevin Smith. Good evening to our guest tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you all, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to room 592, where we unleash the truth. Viewers and listeners, tonight we have a double header for you. We have Mr. Sian Durjan here to talk about a little bit about the law. And at 8 p.m., we'll be joined by Mr. Freddie Kassoon as we get into the political discussion. However, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to remind you that the views expressed in room 592 are not necessarily shared by the owner and publisher of this outfit, and so they are not liable in any way. We have a lawyer in the house, so I can speak very, very freely. But ladies and gentlemen, just before I introduce Mr. Sian Durjan to you tonight, I just want to share a brief little perspective. You may not all agree with me here. You may not agree with me now. But ladies and gentlemen, we are people of many cultures, many races, political background, what have you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for 5 long months, I and others like me, we stood up for democracy, fearlessly and without favor. I and others like me, we called for democracy, rule of law, and justice. Those 5 months that I have been here, campaign has actually been longer time than the political party spent on the campaign trail. But we stood through it. And ladies and gentlemen, throughout it all, I have maintained right is right and wrong is wrong, regardless of who does it. And you see, ladies and gentlemen, over those 5 months of this so-called election season, I have insisted that it is the court and nowhere else that has to decide on the allegations of fraud into those elections. We cannot make an allegation and then make it as if that allegation is now factual. It is a court that must decide on such allegations. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about the incident last night regarding Christopher Jones. And neither I nor you, we are not a court. I cannot take on the mantle of a court. And ladies and gentlemen, I cannot pronounce on whether Chris Jones committed a crime or not. That is for a prosecutor to prove and a court to so rule, and for tonight our Attorney General to tell me whether I'm right and wrong or wrong. But ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the right of a citizen, our citizens, we must speak out. Last night, I felt embarrassed to see what a political spectacle was being made of a Chris Jones issue, that the police could choose the night time to turn up and search for whatever they were searching for, that the police could go to the lengths to ignore certain documents, that the police could want to become a court, is amazing to me as a citizen of this country. Our rights must be adhered and upheld by no other than the police. Let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, in the 1970s, the goon squad used to turn up at our homes, and in the dead of night, they would tumble through our house, purportedly searching for so-called ammunition. As a child, I grew up in deep fear of the police because they would burst into a yard, burst through our doors, ransack our beds, have us crying as kids. And it happened over and over and over again. It was wrong then, and it is wrong now. 5 years ago, only 5 years ago, we saw SARA, the State Asset Recovery Agency, and other agencies politically used by APNU AFC to embarrass politicians who were ousted from office. It was wrong then, it is wrong now. Laws, rules, and procedures must be followed and upheld by the police. Ladies and gentlemen, the question we might need to ask ourselves, is Chris Jones booked on an aircraft to go somewhere that the search and seizure could not have been done during the day? Was the aim to embarrass the man? And if it was the aim to embarrass him, then you break all the rules you are supposed to uphold to achieve a purpose of embarrassment. Mind you, let me repeat, I'm not a court, and neither is the police a court of law. So we cannot pronounce on the substantive matter of whether or not the items he had belonged to him or to the state. That is for the court to determine. But alas, friends, a substantive matter has become a minor matter in the face of a public substantive abuse of power. Tonight, we want to discuss these things. Should they be happening? What rights do we have as citizens? How should search and seizure be conducted? And to this, I've invited and asked our young but very proactive attorney at law, Mrs. Sian Durjan, to join us in this segment of The Law and You, as we talk a little bit about search and seizure and what rights you have. Ladies and gentlemen, my personal view is that the police were really wrong to do what they did. And as a citizen of Guyana, I felt for a brother citizen of this country. No one should go through these things. But Sian, he will correct me whether I'm wrong. And ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome a young man to our room 592, Mr. Sian Durjan, as I said, attorney at law, very, very energetic, very proactive, and recently married. And let me congratulate you, Mr. Durjan, and your beautiful wife. At least there is beauty in the family. I had to say that, my friend. I had to say that. No offense, man, but congratulations to you, my young friend.
Thanks so much. It certainly wasn't going to come from me.
Great. And welcome to our program once again. And ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you all once again. And let me also say an apology for the absence of Mr. Leonard Gildari. As you know, he has taken a week off so that he could fill his starving stomach. He has been crying out about all the pastries everybody else been cooking, and he wasn't having any. So he is taking five nights off this week to really go and fatten himself up. You'll see him back in action on Monday. So let's get on with our discussion. Sian, can you tell us, the legal side of things about search and seizure, sir? What rights do we have as citizenry? As a citizen of Guyana, Yog Mahadeo lives at a particular address. Sir, can the police turn up here and just want to enter into my home to search and seize property? What rights do the police have? What rights do I have? Can you take us through it a little bit? Time is in your hands, sir.
When it comes to property, when it comes to privacy, the rights to yourself, the starting point is always the Constitution. We have what you call enshrined fundamental rights. In Article 143 of the Constitution, we have the fundamental right, which is the protection from arbitrary entry and search. And what it simply says is that no citizen's premises or person even shall be searched by anyone unless Parliament or the law provides for that specifically. Now, when we check our criminal laws, such as the Narcotics Act, the Firearms Act, and so on, they do have exceptions to that constitutional provision. But anytime someone goes onto your premises, the first thing the law would like you to have is a warrant. The police would have to go before a magistrate, sometimes a justice of the peace, as in the Firearms Act, and swear certain information to apply for a warrant. And when this is granted, then they have the right to go on. But there are always those little small circumstances, those little loopholes in the law that the police can go without a warrant. But anytime that is the case, there are many formalities, many procedures that have to be carried out. The long and short in the answer where Mr. Jones was concerned last night, of course not. The police did not have the power to act in the way they acted. The police would have required a warrant, or in the least, had they gone without a warrant, they would have had to have some kind of authorization from a very high-ranking member of the force. The law says either a commissioner of police, a deputy commissioner of police, and so forth. And this authorization would stand in the place of a warrant only if there is suspected stolen property on a premises. Now, this the police would have to go to the gate and provide this written authorization from the commissioner. The authorization must state the time they are supposed to search, what they are searching for, that is the articles they are allowed to take. They must show the person, the occupant of the building, and first seek permission. If they don't get permission, then they can resort to other means. Of course, nothing of this sort was done. The other reason that this can't apply, the other reason why the police needed absolutely to have a warrant is because in the law, when we speak of stealing, we are really talking about a term of art, which is larceny. In Guyana,
We
Mr.
seem to have
Dujon,
lost
can you
you a
hear
little
us?
bit there.
case, when it was handed to him or given to him or delivered to him, larceny already is out the door. So the stealing provision where the police could have gotten a warrant, where the police could have gone without a warrant, does not apply. The factual matrix that the police allege that he wrongfully got the property through a grant cannot possibly apply. They have to look to other things such as embezzlement, obtaining by pretenses, conversion, all of these other things, which may or may not apply. I don't know what facts they have in the police file. I don't know what irregularities their documents would have unearthed. But certainly for sure, larceny cannot apply. I noticed Mr. Jones and his attorney said that the police had told him that it's alleged that he committed simple larceny. Wrong again. Simple larceny only applies to where the property is stolen, which is up to a value of $60,000. In this case, it's alleged that he stole around 4.9 million, or he somehow wrongfully got $4.9 million. So I think what happened last night was really a disappointment, something to all Guyanese, something all Guyanese should be afraid about, all Guyanese should condemn. Our constitution says that we are to forge a system of governance in Guyana that is based on democratic values and the rule of law. People throw about the term the rule of law loosely. One of the main things, if we are to have rule of law in the country, if we are to be a country ruled by laws and not by the fancies of men, there must be equality under the law. there must be the right to equal treatment under the law. So as much as I condemn the fact that a high-ranking government official used his power to obtain a grant or applied in his governmental capacity to apply for a grant from the government to carry on another business in his private capacity, as much as I despise that idea, I have to despise the idea that something like a few dozen police officers descended upon his house where his 3 children sleep in the middle of the night to go in and take property.
Correct. Thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, to our viewers and listeners out there, our sister Debbie and others, you know, we understand. I personally understand, and I have spoken against it. The police had turned up to the properties, to the domicile of Mr. Ali before he was president in the night, and it was wrong then. And, you know, the police had turned up to other people's places and it was wrong then. And if it was wrong then, it has to be wrong now. The law is the law, the rules are the rules, and it cannot be right because suddenly, you know, different circumstances prevail. And, you know, Mr. Dujan is very, very straight with what he's explaining to us here with regards to how the police ought to conduct themselves. Now, Sian, I don't know whether, I mean, we don't know all the details of this matter, but if the police decide to come to my property to search whatever, is there anything I can do to stop them from entering my property if they don't present a document?
Well, first you have to ask them, what are you here for? Why do you want to come into my place? Do you have a warrant? You understand? If they don't show you a warrant, if they want to become like a bully, you might be better off calling the nearest police station, asking if these men are indeed authorized to be here. You can try to contact the commander and all of these things, but then there is the legal route. You can contact an attorney who can also make his checks, his inquiries. A worst case scenario is you can try to get an injunction, but that relies on a lot of factors because time is of the essence. Darren Wade was very competent last night to get an injunction in the dead of night from the acting Chief Justice over the phone. That's not something a lot of other lawyers can claim to have under their belt.
Correct.
So when the police,
so yeah, continue.
Yes. So you have a right. You have a right to refuse entry to the police if they are unlawfully there. You understand? These are rights that you have. If the police take it too far, well, then I would legally advise that you go with the process, and later on we would have to sue it for whatever. Like Mr. Jones did, he went with the process, or else it could have probably gotten violent. You understand? And so now he intends to sue and try to victimize himself.
Gotcha.
So we are really at the mercy, at the hand of the police court.
So, Sian, let me just say this, that we are going to get a surprise call. We didn't expect this, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get a surprise drop in by another attorney at law that wants to come in and he wants to back up what we're saying here. And this is no other than Mrs. Selwyn Peters, who has just contacted me. He's all the way in Canada, Sian. So, you know, Selwyn is an esteemed colleague of yours in law, and of course a good friend of mine. Yes, and so we are going to welcome Sian here in a moment. So Selwyn, as soon as you're ready, you are welcome to join us at any moment at your pleasure. Meanwhile, Sian and I will continue the conversation. So Sian, now the issue of the guilt, how do I ask this so that we are clear? The issue, let us use Jones as the example. The issue as to whether Jones had misappropriated properties in his premises or on his hands or not, the police will make such a determination, or the police can make such an allegation. Which one?
Well, the police have to get their evidence and all of that. But look, the question is more than that. You see, misappropriation kind of implies some wrongdoing, taking in a wrong way. But the fact of this itself, we have a clear conflict of interest here laid out, where a high-ranking government official tries to obtain a grant from the very government. You understand? In every other country or in many advanced countries, we have codes for ministers. In our Integrity Act, we have a code too, which says that public and private interests shall not conflict. But the long and short of that is that there was a certain definite amount of undue influence that would have occurred when none other than the director of sport is applying to the ministry for a grant. There is also the issue that he was obviously not lawfully entitled for a grant because his contract of employment with the government would have been a full-time contract. So he was not permitted to do other employment. So how is he all of a sudden an entrepreneur or a barber trying to set up a barber shop? You understand? So by no stretch of the mind was he lawfully entitled to that grant. So the problem the police are going to have, however, is why did they go the method that they embarked upon? The fact that they committed an unlawful search and seizure exercise still does not nullify or delegitimize what they found. That is still evidence in a court of law. But they are still in a bit of a pickle. Yes, go on, Mr.
Right. So in terms of police, in terms of this population, hey, welcome, Mr. Selwyn Peters. And I know as long as we get into a legal discussion, Mr. Peters will be, I got to get onto this discussion. But, Sian and I, we welcome you, sir. And please join the conversation right on. You're muted. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're discussing search and seizure, and we are being joined as a surprise guest by Mr. Selwyn Peters from Canada. Over to you, Selwyn.
Hi, Yog. I think I'm hearing myself back, so I'm not sure whether there's whether I'm on or not. But I wanted to say this, right?
Go on.
I wanted to say that I've heard. Well, you know what's happening. I have your program live. I was running your program on Facebook, so I think I'm hearing it back. Just give me a second.
Sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're discussing that search and seizure, and of course, Mr. Sian Durjan, attorney at law, would have expressed the views about what the law says with regards to how the police can come and enter your property with or without a warrant, with or without papers. And so Selwyn is joining us to give us to share his opinion as well on the Jones side of the matter. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, Yog Mahadeo's position is if something is wrong, it is wrong. It doesn't matter who's in power. It doesn't matter who's in charge. Wrong is wrong. Over to you, Selwyn.
Yeah, Yog, this is what my thoughts are because I watched all the videos that were streamed online. I think the issue, the police came firstly without a warrant, and then there was there were the lawyers and the crowd outside of Mr. Jones' house. I've done over 100 search warrants within the last 3 years or so, and sometimes the police and other law enforcement show up without a warrant. And the sort of advice that I give to the clients is that if the police show up without a warrant and they've entered your home, as in the case of Christopher Jones, there should be no resistance regardless of whether you're right or wrong. Let the police do what they have to do and you can challenge it later. The police had no regard yesterday for the order that Justice Brazenton Reynolds rendered that sort of restrict and prohibited them from entering the premises. In that case, there's no way that Christopher Jones or Darren Wade could have won that street battle with the police. And you had
Mm-hmm.
3 children in the house. I'm not concerned about Christopher Jones because Christopher Jones is an adult and he can handle his business. I'm concerned about the 6-year-old girl and those 2 boys that were in the home. So I wish a few things had happened. Given that the kids were in the house, one, I wish Christopher Jones had removed those kids from the scene. Or if he didn't remove those kids from the scene, let the police quickly remove those items that they claim they came for, and that could have been litigated later. 18
Mm-hmm.
barber chairs, 18 mirrors, none of that can compensate no money can compensate for the mental distress and the trauma that those kids are going to live with. The police
Correct.
were heavy handed, no doubt about that. But the crowd that showed up outside the Christopher Jones home also caused the police to adopt that posture because the
Mm-hmm.
police did not want to appear weak.
Right.
And the police did not want to appear as though they're not going to be able to execute their functions because as social media video went viral and a crowd
Mm-hmm.
showed 300 people showed up outside the home. The
Right.
police the police moved with reinforcements.
Correct. And so what happened, Sian, feel free to jump into the conversation as well with Selwyn. To you both gentlemen, so what happened is that what ought to have probably been a routine police matter has obviously spilled right over and is now a big political matter. And it's taking an entire tinge of victimization and witch hunt and all of that. Your comments, please.
I don't know.
This is the way the police
Go
has
ahead.
acted for a long time. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
Selwyn,
No, you go
if I
ahead.
could. This is the way the Guyanese police have been acting for a very, very long time. Look, I have so many canoe matters where canoe would just go into the people's homes and search them and say, we don't need a warrant. But the law is clear that where no warrant is acquired, they have specific procedures they have to adopt. Those procedures are never adopted. They pretend like they don't exist. So even under the previous government, this was a very common procedure. Of course, having a few dozen police and all these vandals, that's a little extra. That's definitely out of the norm. But
Right.
this is the way the Guyanese police have always treated search and seizure.
Right. And Selwyn, just before your comment, so Raul Maycock has said that the substantive issue, of course, is whether Jones qualified for the grant and all of that. And Raul, Yog's view here has been in asking the lawyers present here, has not been to pronounce on Jones's substantive matter. It's been to pronounce on whether the police has adopted the right procedure, and we as citizens, if this were to happen to you and I, what recourse we have. Of course, the lawyers are going to give their opinion on the Joneses matter too. But over to you, Selwyn, whether you want to comment on that substantive issue or not.
Well, let me say this in response to my colleague Sion's comments, and I met him in Georgia, and I have a lot of respect for him. But this is what I think went wrong yesterday as well. Um, in Canada, for example, where we do warrants and where the police is involved in a situation, I don't know why the lawyers, James Bond and Darren Wade, didn't engage in some form of negotiations with the police. Why they didn't come to an understanding with the police? Like all that sort of nonsense, all that sort of calling out and everything that went on prejudiced Christopher Jones in a fundamental way. Like they ratcheted up the tempo, and obviously you cannot win a street battle with the police. I can't emphasize that enough. You cannot win a street battle with the police. And you saw how the police surrounded Darren Wade, and he was actually crying, thinking the police would have arrested him. All that sort of situation could have been avoided if there was a posture to engage with the police, negotiate with the police, work something out with the police.
Mm-hmm. But then you see,
It was a
we are,
crass display of
yes, go on.
it was a crass display of advocacy, you know, and then there were a lot of racist comments being made that we really can't condone, we really can't support that kind of thing. And I fully
Correct.
agree with Selwyn. They ratcheted up the conflict, they escalated the levels.
Correct. Correct. Well, thank you for that. And I know we are being joined by Mr. Freddie Kisoon. Freddie, how are you, sir?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right. And Freddie, just give us 2 minutes more. We are actually discussing
No
search and
problem, sir. No
seizure.
problem. I'm on the line.
Yeah,
Just tell
search and,
me. Just tell
yeah,
me.
you can comment. You can comment if you wish to, but we are discussing search and
No
seizure, and
problem. No
especially as
problem.
related.
I'll wait for the 2
Yeah.
minutes. No problem.
Okay. So Selwyn and Sian, it's been a pleasure to have you here. We're going to get a political discussion for perspectives on politics with Mr. Freddie Kisoon in a moment. But your closing thoughts, Selwyn, and then I'll go to Sian. And Selwyn, in case you didn't hear this piece, that young man in the room tonight, he recently got married. And so congratulations are in order. And I offered to him that, hey, you are the lawyer, Selwyn. I offered to him that we can have the wedding in room 592. I can do the priest bit, you can do the lawyer bit. And jokes aside, over to you, Selwyn.
Let me say this in 30 seconds. Look, I agree with Sion that the police excesses are not only like people are saying, well, this is how the police acting now that the PPP came into power. It's the same thing when the AP and UFC was in power. And we saw that at the Ashman's building with as the deputy superintendent Clifton Davis when he came in there on March 5th, right? And it's been throughout. So if standard operating procedures weren't followed, there's a disciplinary process for that. If the rule of law wasn't followed, the court will determine that. But I think as lawyers, we need to be sober when we're dealing with clients' interests and their rights and jeopardies. And what happened to Christopher Jones would not have happened if he had gotten proper advice. I really have a problem with how the lawyers ratcheted things up yesterday. I watched it and I cannot stress that he was relying on their advice and they really put him in jeopardy.
They did a disservice to him.
Thank you for that, Selwyn. Sian, over to you for your closing thought on this segment of the law. And you, ladies and gentlemen, we have been looking at search and seizure in specific reference to what happened last night with Christopher Jones and what risk you might all have if the police decide to turn up to your property under those same premises. Over to you, Sian, for your closing comments.
We have to stop with the tit for tat politics. An eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind. Violence begets more violence. We need to stop it. And all this did last night was create fodder and ammunition for a lot of racist comments. A lot of the whole sentiment is being stirred again about all kinds of racism. We need to stop. We need to do better. And we need to hold our public officials accountable.
Correct. And just to top it all off, Sian, so you have iterated at the top of the program that the police, when they come to anybody's premises, they need to present with you, or you should ask them, as a citizen, you have the right to ask them what's their business and what authority they come to inspect. You want to take that over, Sian?
Yes, and another wise thing to do would be to film every single thing, record every single thing that the police do. Go into every room with them where they go, make sure nothing is stolen, make sure nothing is planted there. You understand? These are all very wise things to do.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Sian, and thank you so very much for being here, ladies and gentlemen. Please know that Mr. Durjan will be joining us next Friday again for another half-an-hour segment of the Law and You, and we'll be talking about another topical area of law next Friday. I've just sprung it on him. He didn't know this before, but certainly I know as a young man, he can take the pressure. Sian, on behalf of the viewers and listeners and Kaieteur Management, thank you so very much for being here, sir. We appreciate your sage advice.
The pleasure is mine, Yog. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye. And ladies and gentlemen, we say as we say thanks and bye-bye to Sian Durjan and Selwyn Peters for that little segment of our discussions tonight. Let me again welcome Mr. Freddie Kissoon for joining us in room 592 as we get into his perspectives on Guyanese politics as it is. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a monumental week. We have had a number of things happen this week. We have had, for example, the APNO AFC has itemized and disclosed their list of members of parliament, members of the National Assembly. We have seen that. We have also seen that from that point thereon, there was a Justice for All party that expressed great discontent with the list. And of course, as of yesterday, today, we have seen the WPA express some grave reservations on that list. And we'll be asking Mr. Freddie Kissoon for his opinion on that, as well as, of course, the PPPC would have also released his list. Freddie, how are you, sir?
I'm doing okay. I'm always doing okay, just watching at things and keeping in my corner.
Great. Freddie, you want to take us through some of your thoughts as to what's been happening? And if we can start with the APNO AFC list and the most recent WPA pronouncement on their discontent with the way that the list was made up.
That is such a labyrinth of simplicities, eccentricities, and banalities that you don't know where to begin. First of all, one has to separate reality from symbolism. The two are not related.
Correct.
Someone can symbolize something, and that something may not exist. In fairness to David Granger, I don't know for whatever reason, and I would say for symbolic reasons, they had this thing called APNU, but no one really knew who was Keith Scott, what was the name of his party. Look, I have to apologize profusely to people in this country where my job is to know who is who in politics. And I went on Channel 9 television program and did not couldn't remember the name of Keith Scott's party. And I still don't. So, so when the thing was formed in 2011, it was symbolic, but it did not reflect reality. No one believed that seriously that there was a viable biology in a party called Justice for All. This guy had a television program, and it was going into people's home, and he just decided, look, I am popular. I could be a politician. And he formed the thing called Justice for All Party, and just like Keith Scott and WPA, there was no real substance to it. But I think because of the symbolism in it, the PNC say, hey, let's go along with it. Now that the PNC has looked, and they have it, they're not stupid. It's in the papers today. It's in both independent papers today, the results of the elections. And you see that in Region 2, the PPP's votes are double APNU. So what Granger probably did over the weekend and last week, he went through the things and said, listen, it looked like the PNC carried these 31 seats. And I believe, honestly, in my heart, that the PNC won those 31 seats from Afro-Guyanese, the mixed race, and Amerindians. I think those three sectors made up the 31 seats. I do not think, even from reading the papers today with the results that GCOM published, that the AFC got a seat. So right. I think he said, look, we were APNU in government. This thing is over with. The PNC now has to survive. I can't be giving Keith Scott, I can't be giving the WPA. Who the hell are they? They probably don't have 10 members. And that is how you arrived at the thing. Now, they reacted adversely because they were being kept alive by the PNC in a fictional formation called APNU, and they still wanted to be kept alive. So Justice for All said, why aren't you naming, why aren't you putting me or my wife in Parliament? And so that was a natural reaction because the PNC were keeping those people alive. Now, the paradox in the thing that is bewildering is those people stuck with him, and he said, no, look, you don't exist. But the AFC don't exist at all. Now, this is what is strange.
Right.
He said, Granger, you need 7,000 votes to be a reality, to be a fixture in Guyana as a party. Now, he gave the AFC 9. That is 9,763. Now Yog Mahadeo and the thousands of people who are watching and listening to this thing, even people, Guyanese living in Iceland, do not believe that the AFC got 63,000 votes. Now, take today's Starbook and Kaieteur News and tell me where those 63,000 votes come from. So here's what I'm going to say to anybody listening or watching this program. My email address is fredkissoon@yahoo.com. Show me where the AFC got those 63 votes from, and I will stop writing the Kaieteur News tomorrow. That is a promise on my parents' grave and on my... Just let us have this intellectual debate and show me. Say, look, Lenora, okay, Zealot.
Right.
And I will square that with the GCOM publications today. And so, while I see that he was right in getting in ousting those small parties that don't exist, I cannot see why he tolerates the AFC. Now, the AFC did not meet the constitutional requirement of 30% of women. Two of their women founders who founded the party are complaining bitterly. That's Beverly Alert and former wife of Alfred Chotman, Nicola Chotman. Now, you have women on your slate and very big names, and yet you didn't meet the 30% requirement. It's an absurdity. But when it comes to the WPA, I think he was right.
But Freddie, just before you go to the WPA, one moment. We'll deal with the WPA as a substantive thing because I want to ask you some probing questions there. Now, let's go back a little bit. You mentioned something that is, absolutely spot on. There's nowhere that one could prove, it would be difficult to prove that the AFC ever got 60,000 votes in these elections. And your point is that the PNC literally fetched all of the small parties through these 2020 elections. Freddie, the question then is, are you reiterating, or would you reiterate that like Sidney Allicock, who would have been, I believe, from the Guyana Action Party representing Amerindians, that he would not have attracted any respectable quantity of votes?
Well, they could not have lost the election if Dr. George Norton, First Lady, and Allicock had brought it. Those are three very, very huge names.
Yes.
Dr. George Norton is an Almerindian doctor. He was in the PNC for, as we say in common parlance, donkey years. The First Lady is the President's wife and the First Lady. Yet, Sidney Allicock belongs to the Amerindians. Yet, Schumann won a seat.
That's right.
So why are you sending these people to Parliament? The point is that symbolism of 2011, it's over, and the PNC has a right to move on.
Right. So Freddie, this assertive, is it the right word? This suddenly assertive David Granger to make such a call. Where was this man 5 months, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years ago?
Well, I think he was always assertive, but he was assertive in his own devious, insidious way. And he's still being assertive. He was assertive in many of the things he did. Remember, he had 5 ministers looking into the oil sector, the oil and gas sector, and none of them knew when that guy became head of the Department of Oil. Mark what? Dr. Mark Bino.
Right,
So he's always been assertive. The point about David Granger, he's been assertive in very mediocre way, not in visionary ways.
And so, Freddie, do you think that by making this move he has made, he has literally handed the ticket of leadership and the next presidential candidate over to Joe Harmon?
Well, that's a monumental mistake. Let me tell you something which you would know, Yog Mahadeo. We go to the school and buy books for our kids tomorrow. We take a little holiday in Wakenham. Christmas comes. Next year there's something. And when you look, 5 years are on us.
Correct.
Who in the next 5 years is going to forget what Joe Harmon did? It was, if you look, the more you speak about Mr. Granger, the more you feel a sense of disgust. This man is saying, I put a party in opposition that consists of young people, a lot of youths, women. Yet he put the front man for the rig, APNU support for rig elections, as the opposition leader. Now, no one heard what some of the other people were saying during the rig elections. Nobody heard from Guyanese. Nobody heard what some of these PNC leaders were saying. This guy, Joe Harmon, was making himself a monumental clown by saying some of the most facetious things the past 5 months that got the world, not the region, not only the OAS, but got people from as far as the former president of Liberia, the former president of Ireland, all of them commenting on the nonsense that was going on in Guyana, for example. He said the ballots of soldiers were not stamped and were not counted. You could not know that because when they voted with a normal ballot, and those ballots were taken and put with other normal ballots.
Correct.
So scientifically then, if you go into those boxes, you wouldn't know which is a soldier ballot and which is a police ballot. That man went and hired a consultancy firm from Washington that accused the president of committing a criminal offense in Guyana. You know, was it to sign a paper as a candidate? And he put that man as the opposition leader. He is not going to attract anyone. In 2025, the PNC is going to get much less votes. So here is the perpetual contradiction of Granger. He says, I want to be nice to him, but I don't, but I'm reluctant. He just keeps doing nonsense and saying nonsense all the time. The best thing to do was to put some engineer or some university lecturer, some doctor, some lawyer, some businessman that has no baggage. And you hope by 2025, by some miracle, he wins the election. You're going to put Joe Harmon, who was made a member of the PNC just in 1 week?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And he was co-opted into that role.
The Caribbean has never seen a lackluster and incompetent leader as David Granger. I'm telling you, there were a couple in the region. I remember Walters in Antigua didn't know anything at all. I know Gary was a lawyer, but Gary was pretty mediocre. But from the time the Public Affairs Committee was formed by Aston Chase and Chetty Jagan, right through to the formation of the PNC, the United Forces, Peter de Gaulle, going to small parties like the National Democratic Party of John Carter, the Democratic Labor Movement of Paul Tennessee, Llewellyn John's party, none of them have produced a leader that says so much elementary foolish things.
So,
no,
Freddie,
he's
what
really unfit.
then?
He's really unfit.
What is your opinion then of the fate that that faces Aubrey Norton, James Bond, et al.?
One, you have to look at different reasons for their exclusion. One is that Norton is generally seen as a very overtly ambitious person. Remember, Norton was in an internecine confrontation with Robert Corbyn that led to Corbyn filing a writ against him in court. Then Norton was almost expelled by Desmond Hoyt and dismissed as General Secretary. So he would see Norton as someone who's a challenger. So Norton was relegated from 2015, and I don't think once Granger's at the helm, he would want to have any dealings with Norton. When it comes to Bond, Bond hasn't learned anything, and I think he's incapable of learning anything from history. You know what Hamilton Green told me in his home, in his study? Now, I reproduced the interview in a column a few years ago, and I can't remember the exact words. But he did confess to me that he lost the respect over a long period of time from PNC leaders who couldn't see him being a president or a prime minister because they saw him as the street bully. Now, now James Bond comes across as the male Simona Booms. I think he's even more dangerous than Simona Booms. So there may have been some pressure on, or mental pressure on Granger when he looked into his mind. And he said, this guy may very well destroy the PNC. You see, the thing about a street boy bully, he serves your purpose, but he can also be destructive, like Green, and the Vincent Tika case, Green and Dr. Joshua Amsami, because they go out on their own and do nonsense that could damage your credibility. And if Burnham wasn't such a dictator, you didn't have the Cold War, Green would have brought down Burnham's government by some of the most violent things he did. And someone like James Bond serves the PNC purpose because he goes in Sophia and he will get them to do very, very bad things. But he could also be an extremist that, could bring you down.
Absolutely. So, Freddie, to push that further at you, do you think that Simona Brooms, James Bond, Aubrey Norton, those three, for example, and on the other side, Valda Lawrence, do you think they will fade away, or what's your thought?
The problem with political parties since the breakup with the PPP and the PNC is that none of the parties have been able to shape a constitution and shape the politics of the party that decreases or put a brake on the power of the leader. The leader has so much power, unlimited power, that unless you have a total democratic rebellion, which is not possible in these kinds of third world societies, the leader does what he wants. I mean, you could imagine Desmond Hoyt lost an election and had the latitude to expel the most popular PNC leader, Hamilton Green. Look what Corbyn did to Team Alexander. So unless Granger fades, they are going to stay, and you're going to hear episodic voices from them. But given what happened with the elections, there's hardly a future for them because I believe 5 years are going to be on us in no time. And with that oil money and with a new guy, maybe have a new president or finale, and I don't think he's a stupid guy, and he would have learned a lot from the 5 months. I cannot see in 15 years' time from now the PNC. I could be wrong. No one could predict the future. Unforeseen forces come in and change the whole shape of life in the world. But if things go normally and there is no miraculous disappearance of the PPP government, I cannot see for the next 3 terms the PNC holding power in the light of what happened 5 months. The best way I can put it is from 18 years up, that has lacerated the psyche of the nation. And I think... Do you think though that let us take the new brigade, for the lack of a better phrase, the Mahipauls and the Jones and the Duncans who are now in Parliament might rise, the Figuera and so forth, might rise to the fore and become assertive and aggressive leadership to take the helm of the PNC soon rather than later? No, I don't see that, for the fact that the people that you call have not shown any leadership the past 10 years. You see, the best example to take is someone like Vinja Prasad, Frank Anthony, but most of all Anand Nandalal. These are not people that you didn't know about. And when you hear about them, they make bold statements. Do you know Dr. Vinja Prasad was one of the first PPP leaders, apart from Robert Prasad, who came out and told Jagdion Ramatal, we lost the 2015 elections, let us recognize that. Now, that is showing tremendous leadership. But the reason I mentioned those names, Freddie, is that those were the cheerleaders of this rig allegation of APNU FC. I mean, the faces, how would the population ever forgive or forget? Even supporters of APNU FC, half of them, as you would have known, a lot of people recognize that this was a farce that was being purported and carried to the fore and to the zenith by a handful of people. And the cheerleaders who sang that cheer right along were the Christopher Jones and the Ganesh Mahipauls and the Figuera and all of these people. Well, I think the self-destructive direction they went into is that kind of scurrilous, that kind of ugly manifestation of their politics. I saw, I'm not on Facebook, but I did see Duncan literally abusing the character of one of the ambassadors, of the ambassador of one of the most powerful countries in the world, and a country that has been one of the closest allies of Guyana, not only in terms of culture and history, but also in terms of financial donations, economic. And those kinds of things don't augur well for leadership in the future. So when people see how Sherrod Duncan was behaving, now, the reason why Sherrod Duncan was made an MP is because he served the bully boy purpose of people like Ramjatan and Harmon. And so they rewarded him with that because he was going out of his way to behave like a Hamilton Green in the 60s and 70s, and he behaved like that. And I think Ramjatan and Chotman and Cathy Hughes rewarded him for that behavior, but there were many others who were quite respectable people in the AFC that didn't make it to Parliament. I know some of them personally. Take, for example, Nicola Chotman, former wife of Raphael Chotman. Now, that's a pretty decent, nice woman. Those are the kind that the PPP could deal with as they settle in government. But she
Right.
didn't come out and behave like a bully girl, like a Simona Booms. So Kaieteur and Ramjatan had no use for her. You know,
Right. Right.
those kinds
So,
of
so
things.
Freddie, do you then think is there a likelihood or a scenario that the older boys now, the Raphael Trotman and the Kemrad Ramjatan and David Patterson of the AFC are going to prevail over the young and newer members of parliament of the PNC?
It No, the PNC isn't going to allow that. The PNC, the 22 members of the PNC in Parliament aren't going to allow Trotman and Ramjatan to do that. But I believe Trotman, Ramjatan, Kaieteur, and Patterson are going to just get mentally fatigued. And that is because they have been ignominiously exposed as failures. I mean, these people were literally, right, hanging on to the coattails of the PNC in power. You couldn't distinguish them from the PNC. That was one of the points Dominic Gaskin made in his interview to Starbuck.
But Freddie, sorry to interject, but supposing, just supposing that within the next 12 months, Cathy Hughes and Duncan and Patterson and Ramjatan and Trotman, just supposing over the next 12 months, they say, you know what, we're all going to join up with the PNC and we're one party.
I wouldn't discount that possibility. Though I think some of the names you call may very well fade out. I don't think there's a future for a Trotman and a Ramjatan. Their names were too big, and the ignominious falling from grace was too extensive for them to survive. Now, there are people in the PNC and the PPP that maybe performed, maybe whose political behavior was far from pleasant. But you're talking about a different context when you think of Trotman and Ramjatan. You have to remember they did not say things within their own party and then they lie low and then they resurface. They formed a party to bring Guyana into the future, and they had tremendous support from the young people, which form a majority in Guyana, and their abysmal, depraved conduct the past 5 months, and then the overall failure in government, that is such a dent that is going to take a long time for them to recover. I think what we've seen in Guyana is the pattern in the Caribbean, the failure of third parties, and we have gone back to, like Jamaica, like Trinidad, we've gone back to the two major parties.
Right. But Freddie, there is another dimension here. I'm not so comfortable venturing for a full discussion, but just as a mention and for your comment, of course, the PNC has always represented, whether real or not, but it has certainly represented Afro-Guyanese. And the demise, as it were, that has happened over the past 5 months and that may continue to happen, Afro-Guyanese might now start to feel that they want to more gravitate towards a new unit comprising of the same Bond and the same Norton and stuff like that. Where then, what's your opinion on that, sir? And would Afro-Guyanese still feel comfortable under this list of 31 put up by the PNC?
There's a lot of permutations there that you have to look at. First of all, I think the PPP knows that the horizon is a very welcoming one for them in terms of longevity. And therefore, they're not going to throw away a chance of being hegemonic, of being overtly racist. So I suspect one of the policies are going to be to try to woo or try to court Afro-Guyanese. The positive thing Guyana has in its favor in terms of its politics is the young population. Yeah, it has. When a country has 75% of its population under 45, you're talking about a very, very young population, and then 50% of it is 18 years, just about 18, 19 years. So what is going to be difficult for the PNC in the future is there is going to be an elaborate strategy of the PPP to try to win over.
But Freddie, don't
yeah.
don't ignore the fact, and your comment, please. There is a subliminal point here. Look, the PNC, the APNO AFC, for 5 months, they created this perception of fraud in these elections, and they had the wherewithal to make those allegations become reality in the minds of many of their young supporters. A lot of people are out there still feeling that somehow or the other the PPP rigged these elections. And therefore that ability to still woo and spin will now be lost with the loss of Norton et al. Don't you think so, sir?
Yes, but I think you have to remember this mental penetration that they achieved. It hid, it masked a very dark side to PNC supporters. There were a lot of people who wanted the PNC in power and wanted the PNC to win for racial reasons, but they could not say the PNC won, we wanted the PNC in. So they used a reason that you couldn't accuse them of racism. So they said, listen, the PNC, the PPP rigged. One of the indentations made in that penetration was that it was too clumsy and the evidence was not there. Now, I believe we still would have been in trouble. We still would have had physical expressions from PNC constituencies if they had seriously and profoundly internalized that groupthink that the PNC leaders and the FC leaders spread over those PNC constituencies. But it went badly wrong because they clumsily and asininely keep repeating the same refrain, and they were not putting sophisticated, complex analysis to it. So as the months wore on, the election rigging thing was losing its subliminal and psychological appeal. I believe the reason why there were no furious, demonstrative action on the part of certain low-income areas in Georgetown was because when they looked back at the 5 months, in a Freudian way, they began to question whether this thing was worth it. If the PNC from March the 5th or March the 6th had said the thing was rigged and the PPP was sworn in, you probably would have had problems because that rigging thing would have stuck in their head. But the rigging thing unfolded for 5 months and it dissipated itself. And the reason for that is the length of time, and also there was no complex strategy to cover the propaganda. Every week was one thing after another, and it kept falling down. And after 5 months, it fell right completely down. So by the time they were ready to swear in Orphan Ali, there was no energy or anything left to believe anything at all. So, though I believe there were people who sincerely thought in their mind that this thing was rigged, by June, July, they were beginning to question that by the sheer asinine antics of their leaders.
Right. And Freddie, I think there was a notion in some quarters. I don't know whether you share the view, but there was some notion a notion in some quarters that the PPP may have actually or could have actually considered giving some government position to a Lennox Schumann. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I am not sure if they're still not thinking like that. Remember, a government, a ruling party's commonsensical approach to politics is to win over opposition people. Schumann is not the leader of his own formation. I say formation rather than party. He's a leader of his own party, but he comes from a three-pronged formation. And even if they give him a seat, because of the laws, he will lose that, and he joins the PPP. He will lose that seat in 2 years' time because you cannot cross over in Parliament. There's a law against that. So after 2 years, he will not be a member of Parliament. But I think it's too early for him to make that move, and I should be generous to him by saying I don't know if he wants to do that. It's too early for me to put that kind of interpretation to the small parties. But I do believe it's in the interest of the PPP to win over the opposition, and they may very well be doing that for all we know.
Great. I'm certainly inviting Mr. Schumann to room 592 the next week, and so we'll put that question to him. Freddie, let's turn to the WPA, if you don't mind, sir. And with regards to your thoughts. Now, what's her name?
Tabitha Sarabu?
Tabitha Haley.
Tabitha
Sarabu Haley would have been the person that was nominated the last time around by the WPA as its representative in Parliament. And that name is still on the list. And so when the WPA would have written that letter it did yesterday or today, for me, it struck a chord, because is it now saying that the Tabitha Haley person is not representing them, or is it saying it doesn't agree with this person representing them? But your thoughts, sir?
It's a multi-dimensional explanation, and it needs some detailed elaboration. Let's see if we can get some of the dimension in. One, during her time as minister, she became very close to the PNC. During the campaign, she was indistinguishable from the PNC. And during her time as minister and during the campaign, she hardly wore any WPA badge on her sleeve. And I think they felt that Granger chose her because he saw her over the past year as now gravitating to the PNC. The problem I have psychologically when I say the WPA is that I'm very uncomfortable, because when you say the WPA, it sounds as if you're talking about a party. The WPA is literally Desmond Chotman, the GCOM commissioner, Takuma Ogunse, and David Hines.
Right.
There's no question at all in my mind, Yog Mahadeo. There is not even a modicum of doubt in my mind that that letter was formulated and shaped by just three persons. David Hines from the United States called in Ogunse, Trotman, and they say, listen, he can't pick Sarabu without telling us. Now, that is the first dimension. I think they felt Sarabu had gone over. The second dimension is it's more sinister than what we think. Listen, all small parties have come and they have become moribund, and then through a natural process of evolution, they are dead. You could just think of them, the Ravidev's ROAR role, something Mansur Nadim form called TUF, TUF. It boggles the mind. It boggles the mind to understand why these three persons, Desmond Chotman, Taguma Ogunse, and David Hines, keeping this thing alive. Because Clive Thomas is gone. He's nearing his 80s. He has nothing to do with the WPA. Rupert Rupnaraine is gone. He has nothing to do with the WPA. So it is these three persons. Now I suspect what they did in removing themselves from the APNU is that it is opportunistic and very brutal opportunism. The PNC is out of power. It doesn't look like the PNC is going to be in power for a long time. When you had the PNC in opposition in 1992, it stayed in opposition for a long time, and then it teamed up with a very dynamic third party, and still it lost power. It almost lost power. It just got 4,000 votes more than the PPP in 2015. With this crazy thing that went on for 5 months, the PNC is not going to be in power for a long time. So what the triumvirate, what the three-person kings did in WPA, say, listen, if we break from APNU, we could still keep this thing alive called the WPA. Remember, in Parliament now in opposition, the PNC is going to swamp the WPA. Now, these three men figure out to themselves, look, if we break away from APNU, keep this fictional thing alive, we in our own right could stay alive because we could criticize the PPP in our own right and stay alive based on the fights we pick and the issues we highlight. If we in APNU in Parliament, we can't do that. We are swamped by 30 parliamentarians who belong to the PNC, including the AFC. So virtually the three-man party is dead if they accept the 2020 parliamentary dispensation.
Right.
Those three people.
Do you think it's a case that, because remember David Hines was on the list, do you think it's a case of Hines or so not being requested to come on as an MP?
No, he couldn't be in Parliament because I think he have refused on a number of times, have refused requests for them to stay here and take a job. I think he has unambiguously and pellucidly said that he would help, but from overseas, that he's not coming back. So it couldn't be anything from him. I think it may have been the second name on the list, which is a guy from Buxton. I think his name is Kadaki Amsterdam. Now he grew up with Hines. He knows Takuma Ogunse very, very well because Ogunse was involved in the Buxton troubles, and they may have preferred him to Sarabu, who was gone over. But it couldn't be any jealousy in the part of Hines because Hines is not eligible for Parliament anyway.
But Hines was, I believe, I stand corrected, I believe he was on their list. And last week when I had Gail Teixeira on the program, I asked her, how come some of these people are on the list? And she said that the difference, she hinted that the difference might be residency versus citizenship, because as a dual citizen you can be, but nothing stops you from having residency and being there, I think.
Well, think that, the dual citizen thing is impossible to prove, and therefore I believe there are dual citizens that are in Parliament at the moment. There are two things to note about dual citizenship, and that is why anyone with dual citizenship can enter the Guyana Parliament. First, GCOM has a stated position. I don't know if that will change. It is not for us, and we don't have a mandate to secure evidence that someone is a dual citizen. That person has to have integrity and know they're a dual citizen. Now that is nonsense. That is like that's like saying, leave your windows and doors open because people know that they shouldn't thief. So GCOM is not interested. The second thing is, the laws of the United States does not permit the U.S. government and its employees to give information on the citizenship of any citizen. So the Guyana government cannot get that information by law. If it requests that information from its foreign ministry, the State Department is going to say, outside of terrorism or outside of security intelligence matters, they cannot give that information. So that is why I am not sure that in the 2020 election, people did not sign that form. I believe people signed that form and they were dual citizens. Now, I don't want to go any further because the easiest libel to win in Guyana, it is so easy, is if you say a person is a dual citizen and that person sue you, it's scientifically impossible to prove that, because under the law of libel, you have to prove what you say is factual. Where are you going to get the information to say someone is a dual citizen? So I believe they're dual citizens in Parliament, and I think you and I know one or two of them.
Right. Freddie, thanks. It's been great to have you. Your closing comments, sir, as we're about to wrap up.
Well, I would wish I am seeing some unnerving signs, and I would wish the government well. I am not one of them to just start to criticize. I think our criticisms the past 10 years were justified, but those criticisms unwittingly brought into being a monster. I have no regrets that I criticized the PPP. There were personal physical consequences to me, but I never thought that we would have seen what we saw in March. And that took me back to my youthful days of the PNC, that I had to live. I had to be a young teenager, grow up, father a kid with the PNC government, and I didn't want that. And so as a human rights activist, I have to be careful with my activism. I don't want my activism to encourage criminal activity that will endanger the government and endanger the state. I saw Simona Booms on the video, and what she was saying when she said the PPP center was inciting. I saw what David Hines said, and fortunately people didn't embrace him and take to the streets. So my closing remarks is that I wish the government well. They survived. They won the election. I would advise them to reach out to people, not to do anything stupidly, but I would also advise them not to be faithful, because once you're faithful, you're going to give, it's human nature, you're going to give latitude to the opposition who thinks you're faithful, and that I welcome the assertiveness that in Lincoln, the police went and charged Lincoln Lewis. I don't know if he's right or wrong, but if he assaulted the man, he should be charged. I think the police are looking into Mingo and Lowenfield, and those kinds of things I think are necessary. And my advice to the government is to be democratic, try to reach out, try not to be vindictive, but do not allow this kind of bullyism. You know, your time has gone, but let me say this. I am very, very emotionally and psychologically disappointed in the PNC. In 1992, they didn't want a free and fair election. They actually burned down the city in 97. There were post-election violence in 2001. And in 2020, they refused. No, man, there's only so much a nation can take.
Correct. Freddie, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you here in room 592. We certainly will be
Anytime.
asking you to join us again, sir.
I guess
And let me
the door hasn't got a padlock, so I could always walk into the room, right?
Very true, very true.
Okay.
And let me say, Leonard decided he was not going to join because he said you might come with some hardball at him again, and so he didn't join us tonight. You need
But
to face
the
him
man
now.
is a coward then. 21st century has no place for cowards, especially Guyana, given what we've been through.
Yes. Well, Freddie, thank you, and do give
Okay.
our regards to your
Bye-bye.
beautiful, your wonderful
Keep
family, sir.
keep the door open of the room. Keep the room door open.
Will do. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, let me just respond to Miss Caroline Petal Williams. Yes, ma'am, I respect your views there. And I must tell you, I've sent invitations to Paula Lawrence, to James Bond, to Aubrey Norton, and to other members of the senior members of the coalition to join me in room 592. And that invitation will remain open. I am trying to reach out to people like David Hines and so forth to join us, and let us have an open chat about what's happening, and of course their views on the APNO AFC list and other political matters. We will remain open. As Freddie said, the door is always open to bring the politicians in and to talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is weekend, and we certainly wish that you have a great weekend ahead of you. But remember, the weekend will be as good as you make it, providing you stay away from people, stay 6 feet apart, wear your mask, and observe the hygiene that you ought to follow. Wash your hands at least for 20 seconds. Have that soap and soap water on your hand before you rinse it off. Remember, it's you and I that can defeat this COVID-19 disease by observing the protocols that are necessary to be observed. It's been a pleasure to have you here in room 592 once again, ladies and gentlemen. I do look forward to have the company of Mr. Leonard Gildari again from Monday, and we will be here on Monday evening welcoming you with another guest. I'm not going to tell you who's the guest now, but we were hoping, and we are working to having somebody who can talk to, the infrastructure in this country and stuff like that. But ladies and gentlemen, we'll certainly make those announcements when it's confirmed. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Remember to say a prayer for this beautiful country of ours. It is still the best place on God's given planet. Do stay safe. Have a wonderful weekend with your family, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks to the management and team of Kaieteur Radio, to all the boys there, have a great weekend as well. Mr. Paul Nehru, Tennessee, sir, Gillian Lewis, my sister, and all of you, have a great weekend. It's been good to see you here. Until Monday evening, join us again in room 592. Bye-bye now.
COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex Soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex Soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex Soap is affordable and available nationwide.
Kaieteur Radio.
Covering Guyana from coast to coast.